I married Andrea 5 years ago after my mother introduced me to her, believing she would make a good wife. She was kind, soft-spoken, and had a certain warmth that made me feel at ease. After our wedding, she decided to become a housewife, and I continued working as an accountant for a well-respected businessman in Culiacan. Life was good. I made sure Andrea had everything she could want. A beautiful house in Colonia Centro, a comfortable lifestyle, and the freedom to do as she pleased. She had once mentioned wanting children, but later she decided we should wait. I agreed, thinking we had all the time in the world. For the first few years, things were peaceful. Andrea kept the house in order, prepared delicious meals, and greeted me with a smile when I came home. She was my quiet refuge from the stress of work. But then, she started spending more time with a group of women from the neighborhood. At first, I thought nothing of it. A woman needs company, I told myself. But soon, I realized these women were not the kind of company she should be keeping. They were housewives, yes, but not the respectable kind. They dressed in fine clothes bought with their husbands' hard-earned money and spent their days gossiping, drinking coffee, and complaining about their lives while doing nothing to improve them. Their husbands worked themselves to exhaustion, while they lived in ease, spending without restraint. I saw them for what they were: leeches, women who bled their men dry without a second thought. And I did not want Andrea to become like them. One evening, as I sat at the dining table, loosening my tie after a long day, I decided to talk to her about it. "Andrea," I said, watching her as she set down a plate of fresh tortillas, "I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time with those women from down the street." She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Yes, they're nice. It's good to have friends nearby." I scoffed. "Nice. Andrea, do you even know what kind of women they are? They do nothing all day except waste their husband's money and complain about their lives. They have no respect for the men who provide for them." She frowned, crossing her arms. "That's not true. They're just housewives like me. We talk, share things. What's wrong with that?" I sighed, rubbing my temple. "What's wrong is that they will fill your head with nonsense. First, it's harmless chatter. Then, it's complaints about their husbands. And before you know it, they'll be telling you that you deserve more, that you should demand things from me, that your life isn't good enough." I leaned forward, my voice firm. "I work hard for us, Andrea. I give you everything you need. I don't want you listening to women who don't appreciate what they have." She pursed her lips, irritation flickering across her face. "I am not a child, Diego. I can choose my own friends." I narrowed my eyes. "I'm just asking you to be careful. Stay clear of them. They're not good for you." She shook her head, her jaw tightening. "You don't know them like I do. They're not as bad as you think." I exhaled sharply, frustration rising in my chest. "Andrea, I know exactly what I'm talking about. Just listen to me." But she didn't. That evening in July started like any other. I had spent the day at work, balancing accounts and dealing with the usual stress of numbers that never lied. By the time I drove home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep purple. I was tired, but looking forward to a quiet dinner. Maybe even a short conversation with Andrea if she wasn't too distracted by whatever gossip her new friends had fed her that day. But when I stepped inside, the house was silent. Too silent. The kitchen lights were off, the table untouched. That was strange. Andrea always had something ready, even if it was just leftovers from lunch. I called out her name. Nothing. My eyes flicked to the parking area. Her car was still there. That meant she hadn't gone out driving. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. It rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. My fingers tightened around the phone as my mind raced through the possibilities. Where could she have gone without the car? Why wasn't she answering? I waited. Minutes turned into an hour. Then 2. By 11 p.m., I was pacing near the front door, my frustration boiling over into anger. And then, just as I was considering calling someone, though I had no idea who, there was the sound of heels clicking unevenly against the pavement outside. I opened the door, and there she was. Andrea stood there, swaying slightly, a lazy smile curling her lips. She was dressed in something I had never seen before, something that barely covered her body. The fabric clung to her like a second skin, cut low in the front, short at the hem. Her makeup was smudged, her hair a mess, and worst of all, she reeked of alcohol. "Diego," she slurred, grinning at me as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Her breath carried the sharp scent of tequila, mixed with something else. And then I smelled it. Cheap men's cologne. Not mine. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked, my voice low and steady, though my blood was running hot. Andrea giggled, leaning against the doorframe as if her legs could barely hold her. "My puny accountant," she purred, reaching out to pat my cheek with unsteady fingers. "Lead me to the bed so I can rest." I stared at her, every muscle in my body tight with restraint. I wanted to shake her, to demand answers, but I could see that she was in no state to talk. So I said nothing. I took her arm and guided her inside, barely able to stand the scent clinging to her skin. She let herself collapse onto the bed with a contented sigh, already half asleep before I even stepped away. I stood there for a moment, looking down at her, my mind a storm of thoughts. Then, without a word, I turned and left the room. Downstairs, the house was as still as before, but now the silence felt different, heavier. I needed answers. I grabbed Andrea's phone from the counter where she had carelessly dropped it. She never had a lock on it, never needed one. My fingers moved quickly as I opened her messages, then her social media accounts. And that's when I saw them. Messages from a man named Juan. Explicit. Nasty. They were sexual in nature. I couldn't sleep that night. Lying in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind kept replaying those messages, those disgusting words that another man had sent to my wife. And worse, her eager responses. My fists clenched under the covers as I imagined them together, her wearing that dress, smelling like him. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. No, I would handle this my way. Morning came, and I forced myself through my usual routine. I showered, shaved, dressed for work as if it were any other day. I needed to be composed. I couldn't let her think she had any power over me. As I stood in the kitchen making my breakfast, I heard her footsteps approaching. She walked in, looking fresh and untouched by the previous night's filth. Her hair was still messy, but she had cleaned her face, washed away the makeup and the smell of alcohol. She moved casually, as if nothing had happened, and sat down at the kitchen table, stretching like a lazy cat. "Hey, honey, make me a coffee," she said, her voice smooth, almost amused. I turned slowly, setting down my mug. My eyes met hers, cold and unyielding. "Why don't you call Juan and ask him to make you a coffee?" I said, my voice calm, deliberate. For a second, she froze. Just a second. Then, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "So, you know," she murmured. She tilted her head slightly. "Did you check my phone?" "I guess yes." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She sighed, almost as if this was boring her. "You know, honey, if I call him here, then you will not be here." She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "So, you will treat me nice like you have done so far, and I will continue to be nice to you. Else, my love, I will make your life hell." I laughed softly, shaking my head. This woman, the woman I married, thought she could threaten me, thought she could manipulate me into tolerating her filth. I turned to her, my smile matching hers, but my eyes held none of the warmth they once did. "I'm going to the office. I'll return at 5. By that time, pack your bags and be gone." Do I make myself clear? Andrea's eyes darkened. The amusement vanished, replaced by something colder. Her lips curled, but she forced another smile. "So it's going to be this way?" I held her gaze, unwavering. "Yes, it is going to be this way." The day at the office dragged on longer than usual. No matter how much I tried to focus on the numbers in front of me, my mind kept drifting back to Andrea, to her smug smile, to the way she had looked at me as if I were some fool she could toy with. My hands kept clenching into fists, and I had to force myself to loosen them before someone noticed. But someone did. Mateo, my colleague and one of the few people I actually trusted at work, had been watching me all morning. He finally pulled me aside just before lunch and motioned for me to step outside. "Come on, Diego, let's grab a smoke," he said. I hesitated, then nodded. Maybe some fresh air would help clear my head. Outside, the midday sun burned down on us as I leaned against the wall and lit a cigarette. Mateo did the same, exhaling a cloud of smoke before glancing at me. "You look like hell, man. What's going on?" I took a long drag, letting the nicotine calm my nerves, then exhaled slowly. "It's Andrea," I muttered. "She's cheating on me." Mateo's brows furrowed. "Shit," he muttered. "You sure?" I let out a bitter chuckle. "Yeah, I'm sure. Saw the text myself. Some guy named Juan." He shook his head, taking another drag. "Bastard." I nodded, looking down at the pavement. "She doesn't even deny it. She threatened me this morning, said if I don't treat her nice, she'll make my life hell." Mateo let out a low whistle. "Damn, man. That's rough." He flicked his cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his shoe. Then he looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Don't worry, Diego. I'll see what I can do." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He just clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Trust me." I didn't press him further. I wasn't sure I even wanted to know what he meant. Somehow, I managed to get through the rest of the workday, though every second felt heavier than the last. When 5 o'clock finally came, I grabbed my things and headed out. The drive home felt endless. My mind kept racing with possibilities. Would Andrea be gone? Or would she be waiting for me, ready to unleash whatever twisted game she had planned? As I turned onto my street, my grip on the steering wheel tightened. There, parked in front of my house, was an old, rusted pickup truck. I felt my pulse quicken. I parked behind it and went in. The moment I stepped inside, I barely had time to register the dim lighting before something heavy crashed against the back of my head. Pain exploded in my skull, and the world spun violently. I stumbled forward, gripping the back of my head, but before I could regain my balance, fists and feet rained down on me. I hit the floor hard, curling up to shield myself from the relentless assault. A boot connected with my ribs, knocking the air out of my lungs. Another blow struck my temple, and the edges of my vision blurred. Someone laughed, a deep, mocking sound, just before darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, my head throbbed, my mouth was dry, and my arms and legs were bound tightly to a chair. I tried to move, but the ropes cut into my skin. A gag stretched across my mouth, the bitter taste of cloth filling my senses. Then I saw her. Andrea stood in front of me, her lips curled into a smirk. She was nearly naked, wearing only a thin scrap of fabric that barely covered anything. Beside her, a man stood just as bare, his muscular body covered in tattoos. He exuded raw arrogance, his dark eyes filled with amusement as he watched me struggle. Andrea chuckled, tilting her head. "Look who's awake," she said. "You took quite a beating, honey." I glared at her, my breathing ragged. She stepped closer, resting a manicured hand on the man's chest. "I told you, Diego. Be nice to me, and I'll be nice to you." She gestured towards the man beside her. "Meet Juan." I clenched my fists, feeling the ropes bite into my skin. Andrea's eyes gleamed. "Juan here controls Colonia Centro and all the adjacent areas. He makes sure everything runs smoothly, that everyone stays in line." She leaned down slightly, her face inches from mine. "You know what that means, don't you?" I didn't react, but I knew. She grinned, straightening up. "He's a powerful man, Diego. The head of Los Reyes de la Muerte, the Kings of Death." She sighed dramatically, running a hand down Juan's arm. "And the way I see it, you've just taken your first lesson in humility." Juan chuckled, his voice a low rumble. "You'll learn soon enough." Andrea turned back to me, her expression darkening. "I hope this little demonstration has convinced you to understand that I now belong to him." She ran a finger along my jawline, her touch making my skin crawl. "And that from now on, you will treat me nicely." Andrea stepped closer, her fingers reaching for the gag tied around my mouth. She loosened it with ease and yanked it away, allowing me to finally breathe properly. I coughed, spitting out the blood that had pooled in my mouth, the metallic taste lingering on my tongue. My jaw ached, but I refused to show any weakness. Andrea smirked. "That's better," she purred, leaning in closer. Before I could react, she pressed her lips against mine, her kiss tasting of cheap alcohol and cruelty. I didn't move, didn't respond. She pulled back, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Now for the second lesson." She turned away from me, sauntering back to Juan, her hips swaying with exaggerated purpose. He grabbed her without hesitation, his hands roaming over her body. Right there in front of me, they began their act, moaning, touching, lost in their own twisted pleasure. Andrea gasped dramatically and looked over her shoulder at me. "Watch me make love to a real man," she said breathlessly. "Do you like what you see?" I kept my face emotionless, my breathing slow and controlled. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Annoyed by my silence, Andrea pulled away from Juan and stormed back toward me. She raised her hand and struck me across the face, the sharp crack echoing through the room. My head snapped to the side, but I didn't flinch. "Speak, you puny accountant," she hissed. I looked up at her, my eyes burning with quiet fury, but I said nothing. Juan laughed, stepping forward. "Tough guy, huh?" He cracked his knuckles. "Let's see how much fight you've got left." The first punch landed in my gut, knocking the air from my lungs. Another hit smashed into my ribs. Then another. I lost count of the blows as pain exploded through my body. My vision blurred, but I clenched my jaw, refusing to let out a single sound. Darkness swallowed me again. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the cold. My body ached, my head throbbed, and a sharp pain shot through my ribs with every shallow breath I took. I tried to move, and that's when I realized I wasn't indoors anymore. I was lying in an open pit. The damp earth clung to my skin, the scent of blood and mud filling my nostrils. My body was bare, vulnerable, covered in bruises, dried blood, and filth. Slowly, I turned my head and saw a folded piece of paper resting near my hand. I forced myself to sit up, biting back the groan that threatened to escape my lips. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the note. "Dear husband, if you make it out alive, come home and make me a coffee. Hope you learned your lesson. Andrea." A slow, cold rage spread through me, dulling the pain. I clenched the letter in my fist and looked up at the walls of the pit. It wasn't deep enough to keep me trapped, but my body protested with every movement as I dragged myself up. My fingers scraped against the rough dirt, My legs trembled, but inch by inch, I climbed out. The sky above was a deep, empty black, the air thick with humidity. I looked around. I was on the outskirts of the city, miles away from home. And I was naked, but I didn't care. I started walking. The dirt road was rough beneath my bare feet, each step a reminder of what had been done to me. Blood trickled from my wounds, mixing with the sweat and grime that covered my body. I ignored the stares of passing strangers, the gasps of horror from those who caught sight of me. My focus was set on one destination, my boss's house. The guards saw me before I even reached the gates. Their expressions shifted from shock to understanding, and without hesitation, they moved aside, opening the heavy iron doors for me. Not a single word was exchanged. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the marble floor of the grand mansion. The air was cool, scented with expensive cigars and aged whiskey. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over the hall, illuminating the pristine luxury of my employer's home. And there I stood, naked, bloody, and broken, in the center of the large hall. Within minutes, a piercing scream cut through the silence. The maid had spotted me. Her hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. The scream echoed down the grand hall, sending a ripple of movement through the mansion. Doors creaked open, hurried footsteps followed, and within moments, the commotion brought my boss himself rushing down the sweeping staircase. He stopped a few feet away from me. His sharp eyes scanned me from head to toe, taking in my battered, bloodied, and naked form with a calm, unreadable expression. He didn't ask what happened, didn't gasp in shock like the others. He simply studied me, his gaze hard, calculating. Then, in a low, firm voice, he spoke. Name. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. My ribs ached, my head pounded, but I met his gaze and answered. Juan, I said. Los Reyes de la Muerte. Something in his expression shifted, barely noticeable, but it was there. Recognition. Understanding. A flicker of something cold and dangerous. Without missing a beat, he turned to his men. Get him a doctor. His men moved without hesitation. Two of them stepped forward, careful but firm, and supported me by the arms as they led me away. My legs trembled with each step, my body barely holding itself together, but I let them guide me. They took me to a large, tiled bathroom, pristine white, with gold fixtures and a wide glass shower. One of the men twisted the knob, and steaming water rushed from the overhead rain shower. The other gestured for me to step in. I did. The warm water hit my skin, washing away the blood, the dirt, the filth of the pit. It stung where my wounds were raw, but I gritted my teeth and let the heat soothe my aching muscles. My vision blurred slightly from exhaustion, and if it weren't for the two men gripping my arms, I might have collapsed right there. I didn't speak. Neither did they. By the time I stepped out, my skin was clean, but the bruises and cuts were even more pronounced. Someone had brought a fresh towel, and I wrapped it around my waist as they helped me to a room. The doctor arrived shortly after, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He knelt beside me, examining my injuries with experienced hands. He checked my ribs, felt for any fractures, and tested my reflexes. His touch was firm but careful. You're lucky, he said after a moment. No broken bones. Just deep bruising and a few cuts. You need rest. He reached into his bag, pulling out a small bottle of pills. Take these for the pain. I nodded as he handed them to me. A few hours passed in a haze of pain and exhaustion. The painkillers dulled the worst of it, but my body still ached, a deep, pulsing reminder of what had been done to me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the events of the past day playing over in my mind like a film I couldn't turn off. Then, the door creaked open. I turned my head slowly, my muscles protesting the movement, and saw him, my boss. He stepped inside with his usual air of quiet authority, his tailored suit pristine, his expression calm. Without a word, he pulled a chair beside my bed and sat down, crossing one leg over the other as he studied me. For a moment, there was only silence. Then he smiled. ¿Qué tipo de muerte? He asked, his voice smooth, almost casual. What kind of death? I held his gaze, my throat dry, my body screaming for rest, but my mind was clear. I knew my answer the moment he asked the question. Lento y doloroso, I said. Slow and painful. A low chuckle rumbled from his chest. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger against the armrest as if considering something. His smile didn't fade. Good, he said simply. Then, he rose to his feet, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve with deliberate ease. Rest up, he told me. I will set the stage for you. And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next day, I was back on my feet, still sore but moving. My ribs ached with every breath, and my knuckles were bruised from clenching my fists in my sleep. But none of that mattered. I was alive, and I was waiting. Boss came to see me in the afternoon, stepping into the room like a man who already knew how the story would end. He glanced at me, assessing my condition with a nod. 2 days, he said, and we will be all set. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't need one. I simply gave a small nod in return. That was all. The pieces were falling into place. That evening, back at my house, Andrea was alone when Juan arrived. He let himself in, his usual cocky demeanor stripped away. He looked unsettled, his movements sharp, his eyes scanning the windows as if expecting something to come crashing through at any moment. Andrea, draped lazily over the couch, raised an eyebrow. What's with you? Juan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Something's wrong. Some big cartel boss has put a hit on my men. He gritted his teeth. Some of my boys have quit, others have been killed. It's like someone's hunting us. Andrea sat up a little, frowning. So what does that mean? Juan's jaw tightened. It means we need to lay low for a while. There was a pause, the weight of his words settling in the air between them. Then Juan turned to her, his gaze sharp. Has your husband come back? Andrea smirked, waving a dismissive hand. Please. I bet he ran home to his mommy. She laughed. He's just a puny accountant. Juan didn't laugh. His expression didn't change. What did he say he did for work? He asked. Andrea shrugged. Some accounting firm, I don't know. He mentioned his boss once, some guy named Mesa something. She waved her hand vaguely. I don't remember. Juan stiffened. His breath hitched for just a second, but Andrea noticed. He turned to her slowly. Mesa? He repeated. Andrea frowned. Yeah, why? Juan's face darkened. Is he a cartel boss? Andrea scoffed. How should I know? I've never met him. A thick silence settled between them. Juan's eyes flickered around the house, taking in the expensive furniture, the polished floors, the framed artwork on the walls. Then he asked, almost cautiously, how does a small-time accountant afford a place like this? Andrea didn't answer. She didn't need to. For the first time, fear crept into their minds. Andrea scoffed, rolling her eyes. Nah, his boss must be some big businessman. My husband is a puny man. He doesn't have the guts or the bravado to be anywhere near a cartel boss. He'd crap his pants near any real criminal. One didn't reply right away. His fingers drummed against his thigh, his mind racing. Finally, he muttered, I beat him to a pulp, but he didn't let out a single moan. Andrea just waved a hand. Please, he was probably too scared to react. But before Juan could respond, the sudden screech of tires outside made them both snap their heads toward the window. They saw the taillights of a pickup truck disappearing down the darkened street, vanishing into the night. Juan's entire body tensed. Something was wrong. He grabbed his pistol from the table and strode toward the door, barking out, Hey, where the hell are my men? Silence. No response. A cold sensation crawled up his spine, but he shook it off and stepped outside, his grip tightening around the gun. His eyes darted around the yard, searching for movement, for anything out of place. His men had been stationed outside. Where the hell were they? Then he turned to his truck. Cautiously, he stepped toward it, his fingers curling around the door handle. He yanked it open. 2 objects tumbled out onto the dirt with a sickening thud. Juan took a step back, his breath hitching. His pulse roared in his ears as he stared down at the severed heads rolling at his feet. Both his men, decapitated. Their dead eyes stared up at him, lifeless and hollow. Their heads had been left as a souvenir. Juan's face turned pale as he stumbled back into the house, slamming the door behind him. His chest heaved as he locked eyes with Andrea, his usual arrogance replaced by sheer panic. Grab whatever you can. We need to leave. Now. Andrea frowned. What? What's going on? Juan grabbed her wrist, his grip tight. Don't ask. Just do it. Something in his tone made her swallow her protests. Without another word, she rushed to the bedroom, yanking open drawers and stuffing a small bag with whatever she could, clothes, jewelry, cash. Her hands trembled as she zipped it up. They bolted out the door, Juan clutching his pistol, scanning the darkness. The 2 severed heads still lay on the ground by the truck, blood pooling in the dirt. Juan's jaw clenched as he shoved Andrea inside and jumped behind the wheel, turning the ignition with shaky hands. The truck roared to life, and he floored it, tires screeching as they sped down the road. For a moment, there was only the hum of the engine and Andrea's panicked breathing beside him. But then, in the rearview mirror, he saw them, 2 black SUVs trailing them like shadows. Shit, Juan muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. Andrea twisted in her seat, eyes wide. Who are they? Juan shouted, People we don't want to meet. He slammed his foot on the gas, the truck lurching forward, but the SUVs kept pace, their headlights glaring like hungry wolves. Andrea clutched her bag to her chest, voice shaking. Do something. I'm trying. Juan snapped, swerving onto a side road, trying to lose them. The truck jolted over the uneven dirt, but the SUVs stayed right behind, relentless. Then, Out of nowhere, a pair of blinding headlights appeared from the side. Andrea barely had time to scream before the impact hit. A massive truck rammed into them from the left, metal crunching against metal. Their truck spun violently, rolling over with a sickening series of crashes. Glass shattered. Andrea's scream was cut short, and Juan cursed as they tumbled like rag dolls. When the wreck finally came to a stop, Juan groaned, pain shooting through his body. Dazed, he pushed open the broken door and stumbled out, dragging Andrea with him. But as soon as they got to their feet, they froze. They were surrounded. Figures emerged from the darkness, armed men in black, their faces expressionless, their weapons ready. Before Juan could reach for his pistol, someone stepped forward and cracked him across the face with the butt of a rifle. He collapsed to his knees, blood dripping from his mouth. Andrea shrieked, trying to run, but rough hands grabbed her, yanking her back. "No, let me go," she screamed, thrashing, but the men held firm. Juan spat blood, glaring up at the shadowy figures. "Who the hell are you?" No answer. They were dragged toward one of the waiting SUVs. Their hands were tied behind their backs with zip ties, their faces covered with huge black bags, the doors yanked open. And then they were shoved inside. The doors slammed shut. The SUV drove off. The SUV rolled to a stop, its tires crunching against gravel. The doors swung open, and rough hands grabbed Juan and Andrea, dragging them out and tossing them onto the ground like discarded trash. Andrea whimpered, coughing as dust filled her lungs. Juan groaned beside her, his body still aching from the crash. Their heads were covered with thick black bags, suffocating them in darkness. But within seconds, those too were ripped away. Blinking against the harsh lights, Andrea and Juan found themselves in an open courtyard, surrounded by men in dark suits. The air was thick with the scent of gasoline and something metallic, blood, perhaps. And then, in front of them, stood a man in a pristine white suit. He was elegant, almost out of place in such a grim setting. A smile stretched across his lips, but his eyes held no warmth. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "I was waiting for you." Andrea shuddered as he stepped toward her, his polished shoes clicking against the ground. He extended a hand, helping her up with an unexpected gentleness. "You must be Andrea," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Diego's wife?" Andrea stiffened, her mind racing. The way he said Diego's name, it wasn't just recognition. It was reverence. Then the man turned to Juan, who was still kneeling on the ground, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Do you have any idea who Diego is?" he asked, crouching slightly, looking directly into Juan's terrified eyes. Juan swallowed hard, but said nothing. The man chuckled and stood up, brushing imaginary dust off his white suit. "He is the most important man to me," he continued, his voice steady. "Diego is my accountant. He ensures that every risk I take, every investment I make, is worth every penny. He watches over my fortune, keeps my enemies from stealing from me." His smile faltered for a brief second, his eyes darkening. "And do you understand what happens if someone disrupts that balance?" Juan's breathing grew ragged. He understood now, this wasn't just any man. The stranger straightened his jacket, smoothing out the fabric before flashing another cold smile. "By the way," he said, his voice almost casual, "my name is Santiago Meza Lopez." He let the name hang in the air, watching as Juan's face drained of all color. "You must have heard about me." Juan's lips parted, but no words came out. Santiago chuckled, his expression filled with cruel amusement. "I love making soup." Juan was on his knees, his hands trembling as he clasped them together, his voice shaking. "Please forgive me," he begged. "I made a mistake." Juan was on his knees, his hands trembling as he clasped them together, his voice shaking. "Please forgive me," he begged. "I made a mistake." Andrea turned toward him, confusion clouding her face. But as she turned back, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing beside Santiago Meza Lopez, was Diego. He moved with a slight limp, the remnants of the brutal beating he had endured still evident in his stride. Yet, despite the pain, there was a quiet, unnerving composure about him. His expression was void of emotion, his gaze cold and unreadable. Andrea felt her stomach twist. This was not the Diego she had known. Santiago, standing with effortless confidence, glanced at her with an amused smirk. "Did I ever tell you?" he mused, as if sharing an entertaining story. "Diego was my most trusted hitman. My best." Andrea's eyes flickered to Diego, searching for something, anything, that resembled the man she once knew. But there was nothing. Santiago chuckled. "I trusted him so much that I asked him to study accounts," he continued, gesturing toward Diego. "And boy, he did not disappoint me. Numbers, money, investments, he mastered them all." Juan shuddered, his head still bowed. Andrea took a step back, suddenly feeling like the ground beneath her was crumbling. But today, Santiago went on, his voice laced with amusement. Diego has decided to go back to his roots. My most ruthless killer. Then Lopez took out a small knife from his pocket and put it in Diego's pocket. He smiled and said, "I give you back what you once handed to me." Andrea was shaking, wanting to protest, to deny what she was hearing. Without a word, Diego reached into his jacket and pulled out that knife. The blade glinted under the dim light. It was not too long, not too short, perfectly balanced. Andrea's breath hitched. Juan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with terror. He tried to shuffle backward on his knees, but there was nowhere to go. Diego moved forward, his motions smooth and precise, as if rehearsed 1,000 times before. There was no hesitation, no pause, no words. The knife sliced through the air in a quick, clean arc. Diego kept moving the knife with clinical precision. Juan's screams shattered the silence, raw and agonized. Diego was already stepping back, slipping the blade into its sheath with a practiced flick of his wrist. He returned to his spot beside Santiago, standing as still and expressionless as before. Andrea turned to Juan, and that was when she realized what Diego had really done. Juan lay on the ground, writhing, his body convulsing from the sheer agony of what had just been done to him. His face, or what remained of it, was nothing but raw, exposed flesh. Blood pooled beneath him, his muffled screams barely forming into coherent sounds. His eyes were gone, but he was still conscious, still aware. And worst of all, he could still see. While walking back, Diego dropped Juan's face near Andrea's feet. Andrea stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched her stomach, bile rising in her throat. No words came out. No scream. No cry. Just sheer, paralyzing horror. Then came the sound. A low, mechanical growl. Andrea barely had time to turn before the roaring engine filled her ears. The last thing she saw was a glint of silver and a blur of jagged steel before the chainsaw came down on her. A wet, sickening crunch. A spray of crimson. And then, nothing. Juan had no eyelids to shut, no way to look away. He was forced to witness every second of it. The chainsaw, tearing through bone and flesh as if they were nothing. The pieces of Andrea scattering onto the dirt, the last remnants of her existence reduced to a mangled ruin. He tried to scream again, but the sound that left his throat was more of a pitiful, gurgling wheeze. I stepped forward, my grip tightening around the handle of the chainsaw as its engine roared to life once more. Juan twitched violently as I approached, his disfigured face trembling in what could only be sheer, overwhelming terror. I didn't hesitate. The blade came down. It took less than 5 minutes. When it was done, the two bodies were nothing more than shredded remnants of what had once been Juan and Andrea. A shallow grave had already been dug for them. Two of Lopez's men, silent and efficient, unceremoniously dumped what was left of the lovers into the pit. Dirt followed. Soon, the ground looked as if nothing had ever happened here. As if their betrayal, their pathetic existence, had been erased. Santiago Meza Lopez stepped beside me, lighting a cigarette, his face calm. He exhaled a slow stream of smoke before speaking. "I'll give you a few minutes to mourn," he said, his voice even, almost casual. "Then we go back to our world." The air was thick with the scent of blood and freshly turned earth. The grave was still uneven, the soil not yet settled. I stood over it, staring down at the place where Andrea now rested. If a soul like hers could ever find rest. The night was silent except for the faint hum of cicadas in the distance, an eerie contrast to the violence that had just taken place. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a single rose. The petals were a deep, almost unnatural red, like the blood that had stained my hands. I didn't want to go back to my worst, but you left me with no choice. The wind carried my words away into the night, lost to the void. I let out a slow breath, my grip tightening around the flower for a moment before I knelt down, placing it gently on the mound of dirt. "I gave you a path to walk away," I continued, my eyes never leaving the grave. "But you chose hell." I straightened, adjusting my jacket. My fingers brushed against the knife still tucked away, the blade still warm from Juan's flesh. I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just the cold, familiar emptiness that had once been my constant companion. I turned on my heel and walked back to the waiting SUV. Lopez's men stood at a distance, speaking in hushed tones, but their eyes flicked toward me with a mixture of respect and unease. They knew who I was now, what I was. I pulled open the door and climbed in, settling into the leather seat as the engine rumbled to life. Lopez sat beside me, taking a slow drag of his cigarette, watching me with a smirk that I ignored. The tires kicked up a cloud of dust as we pulled away, the grave disappearing into the darkness behind us. I didn't look back. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.